So question one is to audit the state legislature. Diana DiZoglio had, as part of her campaign, to make sure that she was looking into, when she ran for state auditor, that she was looking into the legislature along with all of the other state agencies and make sure that they were conforming to proper practices in order to achieve their purpose. The role of the state legislature is not to decide what that purpose should be. That's not what she's trying to do in any of the agencies that she has audited, and she has audited all of them. It's merely to expose to the public what their practices are. That's the arguments that have been against it have been focused a lot on the constitutional issues. These kinds of constitutional questions are what I tend to study, and I really have not understood the separation of powers argument against it. The argument that some have been trying to make is that, and this is more true in Massachusetts than the federal legislature, that each branch of the government is separate and they can't encroach on each other. And there were some that were saying that this would allow the state auditor and executive to kind of be telling the legislature what to do. But it's not a policy issue at all. It's merely about making sure that people know what is going on in the state legislature to make sure that they can that they can then make informed decisions and that the legislature can have more light shed on it and its activities. This is important in every legislature. It's arguably more important in states that are dominated by just one party, like Massachusetts is, because that gives the leadership, regardless of which party it is, significantly more power and more control over what happens. They're not under threat of being removed by annoying the public, because the margin of difference is not ever in Massachusetts going to cause a party switch. So that really increases the need for members of the same party as the legislature to make sure they're carefully examining what that legislature is doing. Personally, I was shocked and a little frustrated that the legislature didn't willingly submit to an audit. Nobody is arguing that they can't submit to an audit. The argument is whether or not they are required to submit to an audit. And to see the Massachusetts state legislature decide that we don't want to be transparent, to decide that we want to have our backroom deals, that the people who are voting for us not be aware of how that's working, and to have legislation that legislators may not have had adequate time to read, or that the public isn't really aware of what's going on. To have all these things, they don't want that exposed to the public, and I think that's a travesty. That's why I personally, and again, I'm not speaking for the Acton Democrats, we will each make our own decisions, but I personally am heavily supportive of ballot measure 1. What it would do is make the law clear. People are arguing whether or not the current law allows the auditor to audit the state legislature. That's a question that Auditor DiZoglio says is one way, the state legislature says is the other. But once this measure is passed, then that would clarify what the law is and clarify that now, regardless of who was right before, the law says that the state legislature can audit the auditor can audit the state legislature, and then she would release reports, and we would find out, some of the things that we should be knowing to make informed decisions about what the legislature is doing. One of the most valid concerns that I've seen that I wanted to address is, the state legislature does have the power. This is a statute; it's not a constitutional amendment. They do have the power to then change it and put additional constraints on it and that sort of thing. Largely, in a large way, this is a political tool, because it means that the leadership of the state legislature can no longer just unilaterally decide we're stonewalling here. They would have to actually pass a new law in order to allow themselves to keep stonewalling, which, I, for one, am a very big fan of our reps, and I know Jamie Eldridge is a very big supporter of transparency and is primary sponsor of the We the People Act and fought for that for his whole career. And if you were to vote the other way, I would make that very well known. And I imagine that a lot of people would hold their state legislators to that. So it really grants a lot more political power to the auditor to do her job, not to do any legislation or anything over the legislature, just to do her job of making sure people know what is happening in the legislature. Are there any questions?
Hi. I always have a question. Does it wait? My life is a question. So, by audit, it's not just like the money they spend.
Yeah.
It's not just that. It's how they vote and how they vote in committee. Is it all the transparency stuff?
Well, we know how they vote in committee. That's public record already.
Is that okay?
But
all right.
the process by which they make those decisions of what comes to the floor, the process by which they assign staff, things like that. Procedural operations would also potentially be a part of it, and there can be arguments over the degree to which different things could or could not be. But that would be it. Would my understanding is it would not be limited to just the way they spend money. But the way they spend money. Yeah, I mean there could vary, and I'm not raising any specific concerns about any specific thing, but for example, the way they spend money could also very much impact like what office somebody has, how much staff somebody has, and various other resources, and put pressure on people to vote in a certain way. Who's allowed into leadership roles, who's allowed to run committees, things like that. The way those decisions are made is an important thing for us to know and understand.
I thought she spoke very convincingly at the picnic, and I went up to her afterwards and said, "You convinced me then."
Good. I said the same thing to her.
I just want to say though, yeah, she did. She spoke awfully long too.
I said that
wasn't
too.
in the script. But I get totally the financial stuff. It's when you get into some of the procedural and how they want to make sausage that I get a little nervous. They need time to work out in committee, and it's by design. It's not just necessarily a totally public process.
Yeah.
Particularly when you're trying to figure out how to, log roll something through. So that's what. Are there protections against it going too far?
Yeah, absolutely. She would not be able to change their policies and procedures. She would, so like any particular legislation, what that process is and how that sausage is made, that's not what this would be about. She would look into that to determine what their processes and procedures are. And it may be that some of those are private for good reason. It may be that some of those are private for reasons that she thinks are bad reasons and says so in her report and advocates for changing, but they may justifiably disagree and they don't have to change it just because that's her recommendation.
It's just sunlight.
Yeah, it's sunlight so that we know that they are making backroom deals and this is how they go about the process of making them. That's something that we should know.
I understand that the Senate doesn't operate in this more shadowy way. It's the House. And if the Senate can do it and pass Bizaglio's standard, why couldn't and shouldn't the House?
I haven't followed whether or not, I'll take your word for that. I'm not aware of that specifically myself.
So yeah, I'm here to talk tonight about question 2. Question 2, a yes vote would eliminate the MCAS graduation requirement in high school. So it's one of those questions where yes is eliminating something. For those who haven't been to public school in a while, MCAS is the Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System. It's the standardized test that was put into place in the early 2000s to give the state more data about how our public education system is doing. And at the time that MCAS was implemented, there was also a high school graduation requirement added in 10th grade. And so the MTA, the Massachusetts Teachers Association, the statewide union, has been working for a long time to try to eliminate the graduation requirement. Currently, there are about 700 students every year who who are denied a high school diploma solely for MCAS. So they fulfill the requirements of their local high school, but they don't pass MCAS and don't get to graduate from high school. As you might expect, overwhelmingly, those students are English language learners and students on IEPs who are in special education. And I think as an educator, I mean, I'll plug the yes vote because that's what I'm here to do. As an educator, to me, the reason that you give a standardized test like that is to collect data to be able to compare school districts, right? We could certainly have a wider conversation about the value of standardized testing. It's no surprise and no secret that MCAS scores closely mirror income throughout the state, so no surprise that Weston, Wellesley, Concord, Acton do really, really well on MCAS. Worcester, Boston, Springfield, Fall River do not. But this ballot question is not about standardized testing writ large. It's just about whether or not students should have to pass the MCAS in order to graduate high school. And from my perspective, I don't know what we're accomplishing by punishing students who we already know have identified needs, be it that they are recent immigrants and haven't yet mastered the language, be it they're on an IEP and have specialized educational needs. And this is not, self-serving for me as an educator in Acton Boxborough. Overwhelmingly, our students all pass MCAS. I don't know how many of our students don't, but I'm guessing we could count on one hand. But I'm thinking about educators across the state who, are not as well resourced as we are, who have really needy students, and the MCAS graduation requirement basically adds one more roadblock to trying to help these students succeed. So the MTA is working really hard to help get the ballot question passed.
Thank you.
Is it just the graduation requirement? Because I know the kids, they start taking it in 3rd grade, and then
Yeah.
there's another one up the road.
Yeah,
in
so
7th
kids
or
start
something.
taking MCAS in 3rd grade, and they take it all the way through 8th grade in multiple subjects.
Okay.
And then after 8th grade, they don't take it in 9th grade, and they only take it in 10th grade in order to pass so that they can graduate from high school.
So is that the only one that's being eliminated?
That's the
or
only one
all
that's being
five?
eliminated. So
Okay.
it would still, everything else about the MCAS infrastructure would stay in place, whether that is good news to you or bad news to you. This is really just about the graduation requirement.
Graduation requirements, okay.
Does this mean that the 10th grade goes away? The 10th
Correct.
Correct. So and the benefit to the teachers and students is that you have more time to do other things.
Yes, I mean,
And
I
what
think.
do you get from getting-
I mean, not me personally. In 8th grade, I'm still going to give up as much time
Right.
as I have to for MCAS. But yeah, in high school, it means that, and I don't actually know whether the state would continue to administer it in 10th grade for data collection purposes. I think that would really be up to DESE. But yes, it would mean that high school teachers who have students with really specific needs who are struggling can focus on helping those students pass the rigorous coursework and accountability that already exists at a high school in order to get the diploma, and would remove kind of this high stakes moment in time test.
So it gives them more time.
Yes.
I had a question and a comment. First, the question, my understanding, maybe I was incorrect there, was that the MCAS would not go away, it would just be removed as a requirement for graduation?
Correct.
Okay. So if DESE decides to get rid of MCAS, that's up to DESE. This ballot measure would be independent of that decision. It might make it easier for them to do, but it wouldn't require them to do so.
Yes.
Okay. And then the comment I was going to make is for people with learning disability, both my daughter and I have ADHD, removing these kinds of requirements is an enormous benefit. I know for me, I did very well on the GRE logic that I took as a practice test to see if I wanted to maybe go into grad school, and there was no pressure, and I ended up getting a perfect score. And then I took the LSAT when I really wanted to go to law school, and it was important to me, and it's basically the same test, and I did okay. I didn't change my abilities in between there. It's just that these tests, when there's pressure, for many students don't form a good measure. For many they do, but for also many they don't. And just seeing my daughter now doing MCAS, I can tell you that the time and brain power and stress that she puts into not learning the material, but worrying about MCAS absolutely does take away from the time that she focuses on other studies. And I've seen her not have enough time to like focus as much on the actual learning that she should be doing because she's worried about stressing on the test.
Question, if they fail in 10th grade, they have 2 years, can they take it?
Yeah, they can take it multiple times,
Okay.
so it's not a one and done.
Okay.
But certainly you could imagine if you're a student with significant barriers to passing that test in the first place, taking it over and over and over and over again might not necessarily get easier over time. Keely.
I would just like to say, as someone who's taken the test from 3rd grade all the way through 10th, I don't think it really taught me anything. I think it took a lot of like time, and I don't think we really prepared that much for it. I can imagine like people trying to prepare for it and then taking it, and it's just not, it's never really been mirroring what I really did in school all that often, so it's like a little bit of a side quest that I don't know everyone is like having the privilege to go on. But like at the end of the day, it really doesn't, I don't think it truly mirrors what is going on in school, and it has also taken up like time and time and time, and I struggled in like middle school and elementary school with being very anxious about these tests, and it would take me like way longer period of time to like complete it than most people, and it like truly takes up like a whole like day. There's just a lot of essay content, like essay work and content in there, so I don't know, it wasn't much as like learning as it was just like they got some data that I think they kind of received.
The other thing I would say, I've been obviously following the news coverage closely, and the Boston Globe has been very aggressive in supporting the no vote in their editorials. One argument that I find confusing against this ballot question is folks will say, well, if there's no graduation requirement, standards are going to drop, which is curious because Massachusetts is one of only 8 states left in the country that still has a standardized test graduation requirement to get a high school diploma. Most of the country has gotten rid of them for precisely the same reason that we are trying to fight to get rid of it now, because standardized tests are a moment in time. They disproportionately impact vulnerable populations. So I think there's a desire among the no vote supporters to kind of imply or suggest that Massachusetts is doing something reckless or dangerous. Overwhelmingly, states across the country have abandoned this type of standardized test requirement and tying it to a diploma. So I look at this not as us trying something new that could damage kids as much as just trying to catch up with the rest of the country. In some ways, Massachusetts, our education system is very progressive, but this is a way I think that we're awfully behind the times.
That's good to know.
Thank you.
Yes, this is very, so I was on Facebook Reels watching TV, and there's a lot of advertisements for the no vote, and there's a group that is supporting these advertisements, which I Googled.
Your algorithm must be different. Facebook knows I have no interest in those
Oh,
ads, so I don't get them.
Oh, very much so, but
No, the advertisements, I agree with Colin, because I
Yeah.
keep getting advertisements for Trump too, so it's fine.
oh God, that I do not get. Oh, I don't have it. I didn't save the search, but there's some kind of industry group, and I Googled them, and I don't know if they're corporate shills or not. That's why I was trying to. Do you know who they are?
I mean, I don't.
These ads?
I don't want to get too cynical, but I do think there's kind of a alliance between corporate interests, the private standardized testing companies like Pearson, those who support charter schools, those who are anti-union, kind of the Bill Gates reformer crowd. I do think there's an element of that in politics, where folks who are not career teachers, who haven't spent a lot of time in schools, but are pretty convinced they know what is going on in schools, want to minimize the power of unions, minimize the voice of teachers, increase standardized testing, accountability, all that stuff. So I just said I was going to avoid being cynical, and that was deeply cynical. But yeah, I think you'd be surprised how much I think money and power and interest there is in pushing back against
What do they have
things
to
like
gain
this.
for this? I'm wondering.
Leela had her hand up.
Yeah, there's actually a really interesting WBUR article about who is putting money into kind of for and against campaigns for all of the ballot questions. And Mike is correct in that on question 2, the teachers union is for and is basically entirely funding it. And the against campaign is funded by Education Reform Now, which is super supportive of charter schools. There's chambers of commerce that are donating to it. The data tracks what he was saying, even though he said he didn't want to be pessimistic.
Thank you, Leela.
So thank you, Mike.
I was just going to say, my understanding is New York is getting rid of it.
Regions?
It hasn't gotten rid of it, but it can on the way out of New York.
Yeah, I haven't read that, but good for them if they are.
That's amazing. They've
My
had
wife
this
took the one in New
forever.
York after she had already graduated as valedictorian and then had to go back and take a test after because that's when the state offered it.
Oh, gosh.
It's very hard to motivate yourself to do that.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much for your time
you.
and thanks for
Thanks,
being
Mike.
here. This is
Sure. Voting yes on question 3 would allow transportation network drivers, so like Uber and Lyft, to be able to join a union and collectively bargain for things like better pay or working conditions, job protections. It doesn't necessitate a union specifically. It doesn't create a union. It just says that they have the opportunity to do that. Currently, they're exempted under federal labor laws. This one has been endorsed by Anna Presley, our Attorney General in Massachusetts, both Jamie Eldridge and Dan Sena. I'm happy to answer questions, but it feels pretty straightforward.
Straightforward again. Is it allowing gig workers to join a union or allowing Uber and Lyft? Okay.
So
Yeah, I don't think it applies to all gig workers. I think it's just
yeah.
rideshare.
Rideshare drivers,
Yeah.
yeah. But at the start.
Yeah.
So question 5 is around tipped wages. Currently, tipped workers make a sub-minimum tipped wage. So despite most folks making at least $15 in Massachusetts, tipped workers make $6.75. So this ballot question, if it passes, would raise that $6.75 up to the state standard minimum wage over 5 years. Technically, employers are supposed to make up the difference if people don't make $15 an hour with the tips after a shift, but we know that the restaurant industry in Massachusetts is kind of the highest offender in labor violations. And so that is part of why I'm supporting it, but also ending the subminimum tipped wage is doing that nationally is part of the Harris-Walz economic agenda. It has been part of the Mass Dems party platform since 2021. And it's also been recently endorsed by Hillary Clinton, Progressive Mass, Progressive Dems of Mass, and others. So that is high level question 5.
Yeah, Colin. Is there an opposition group that's advertising against this, or has it been so far? What's that?
Restaurant owners.
The restaurant owners are lobbying against this?
Yeah. I basically like the idea, but I have a concern about small restaurants. Might they be forced out of business by this?
I guess I can't promise that it's not going to happen. This has been implemented in other states like California, and my understanding that didn't happen across the board. I don't know if that's happened to some. Kind of on a personal moral perspective and less about the ballot question as a whole, it feels wild that businesses should exist if they can't afford to pay their workers. We know that the living wage in Massachusetts is about 30 something dollars, and so making 15 isn't exactly like you're making a living wage, but I think that people should be able to get paid. So if your business model is one that can't support paying people who work for you, I don't know that's great.
I have a comment that's not opposed to this, and I plan to vote for it, but I wonder how many of those small restaurants are actually family-owned, family restaurants, and if they wanted to, they could say that the owners are working. You know, if it's family, you could make family members part owners and possibly get around it. And I don't know if that's what people will do. But, you know, the purpose is certainly fine, so I'm voting for it.
Absolutely.